People make these verbal switches when you're in a we-they situation. It's sometimes quite arbitrarily formed groups, but in any case, your group versus another group. So
groups that are simply set up for the experiment, you mean?
It can be,
yeah.
Or you can be talking about them and their group versus someone that's not a member of their group. But you can also do it experimentally, and I don't know that. I haven't studied that work yet carefully to see how long you have to set them up in these arbitrary groups to get this kind of thing going. But you have the following kinds of verbal things that people do, apparently quite unconsciously. If you're a member of my group and you do something good, I make a general statement about Noam Chomsky is an excellent person. Now, if you do something bad, I give a particular statement, Noam Chomsky stepped on my toe. But it's exactly reversed if you're not a member of my group. If you're not a member of my group and you do something good, I say, Noam Chomsky gave me directions to MIT. But if he steps on my toe, I say he's a lousy organism, or he's an inconsiderate person. So we generalize positively to ourselves, particularize negative, and reverse it when we're talking about other people.
It sounds like normal propaganda.
Yes.
So Islamo-fascists or the Irish are all crooks.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Generalize the negative characteristic in the other, so to speak. The information is often somewhere in the organism. It's just well hidden. It's well down in the unconscious. It's well inaccessible. You've built up firewalls against it, etc., etc.
Are there any animal analogs to anything?
Well, I don't know. I believe that self-deception has evolved in two situations, at least, in other creatures. And I believe it could be studied, and I've suggested a way to do it, but nobody's done it. When you are making an evaluation of another animal in a combat situation, let's say male-male conflict, the other organism's sense of self-confidence is a relevant factor in your evaluation.
And that's shown by its behavior, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
So,
and so you
gorilla beating it, thumping its chest. Like that.
Yes, and suppressing signs of fear and not giving away, so forth. So you can imagine selection for overconfidence, selection for suppressing...
For showing overconfidence, even if it's not real. You mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Likewise in situations of courtship, where females are evaluating males. And again, the organism's sense of self is a relevant parameter. We all know that people that have a low opinion of themselves, that's a sexual and romantic turnoff right there. So again, you can have selection without language, it seems to me, for biased kinds of information flow within the organism to keep up a false front.
And that's not necessarily... It may be that the animal that's putting up a false front knows it's a false front.
Indeed, but it may benefit from not knowing it.
Yeah.
It may act more...
Because it's easier to do it.
Easier to do it and perhaps more convincing because you're not giving away evidence.
Secondary signs.
Exactly, secondary signs.
Is there any evidence about this, or it's just speculation?
What you heard is rank speculation.
Is it... Can it be investigated?
I do not know of anybody who's doing it on self-deception. There's excellent work being done on deception in other creatures. To give you just one line of work there that is of some interest. Repeatedly what we find now in wasps, in birds, and in monkeys, that organisms, when they realize they're being deceived, get pissed off, forgive my English. They often attack the deceiver, but especially if the deceiver is over-representing him or herself. If you're under-representing and showing yourself as having less dominance than you really have or whatnot,
they don't.
No, you're not. And the ones that attack you are precisely those whose dominant status you are attempting to expropriate or mimic. It's very interesting, and it suggests some of the dynamic in which, in which fear of being detected while deceiving can be a secondary signal, precisely because if you are detected, you may get your butt kicked, or you may get chased out.
There's even a name for that in the international affairs literature. It's called maintaining credibility. So you have to carry out violent acts to maintain credibility, even if the issue is insignificant.
Right. And that's a rationale for...
It's kind of like the mafia.
Yeah, indeed. And I know, I've heard that rationale used for, for obviously odious stuff. Well, we're maintaining credibility, otherwise we ain't got no street cred.
That's right. That's a common theme.
There was a brilliant study, which is a very difficult one to do at the time. You can do it much more easily now, by Gore and Sackheim about 20 years ago, using the fact that we respond to hearing our own voice with greater arousal than we show when we hear another human's voice. In both cases, we show physiological arousal. Galvanic skin response is one such measure. About twice as big a jump if you hear your own voice. Now, what you can do is have people matched for age and sex read the same boring paragraph from Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Chop it up into 2, 4, 6, 12-second segments. Create a master tape where some of the time you're hearing your own voice, a lot of the time you're hearing not. Now then you've got to press a button which says if you think it's yours, and they also had them press a second button how sure you are. But meanwhile they got the galvanic skin response. Now they discovered two interesting things. First of all, some people denied their own voice some of the time, but the skin always had it right. Some projected their own voice some of the time, the skin always had it right. The deniers denied the denial, but the projectors half the time were willing to admit afterwards that they think they made the mistake of projection.
In a follow-up.
Yes, in a follow-up interview. Right, just asking them. Okay, now the second thing they should...
What do you think the reason for that is?
The difference between the projectors and the deniers?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a good way of putting it, Noam, but to me, when you want to deny reality, you've got to act quickly and get it out of sight. The deniers also showed the highest levels of galvanic skin response to all stimuli. It's like they were primed to do it. Inventing reality, a little bit more a relaxed enterprise, but I haven't...
It's not as threatening.
Yes, something like that. I haven't thought out a good way to put it, but something along that is the way I've been thinking. The final thing they showed was that they could manipulate it. So, psychologists have lots of devices for making you feel bad about yourself, and one of them is just give you an exam. After all, these are university students. Just a little pseudo-exam. Give them their results at random. So they tell half of them you did lousy, half of them you did good. And then what they found was that those that were made to feel bad about themselves started to deny their own voice more, while those that are feeling good start hearing themselves talking when they're not. So, we didn't evolve to hear our voice on a tape recorder. You have to use some kind of interpretation here. But it's like self-presentation is contracting under failure, and it's expanding under...
You might be interested in a book that's coming out by a very smart guy, James Peck, who's a sinologist, who's got a book coming out called Washington's China, in which he does a very in-depth analysis of the national security culture. He went through the National Security Council literature, the background literature and so on, and he does a kind of both an analysis of the content, but also a psychological analysis. It was reminding me of it the whole time we were talking. I mean, what he shows are elaborate techniques of self-deception to try to build up a framework in which we can justify things like, say, overthrowing the government of Guatemala on the basis of some noble objective.
Right.
And it's done by making everything, as Dean Acheson once said, you have to make it clearer than truth.
Right.
And as this picture gets internally created and built up on by each group of national security staffers, it becomes like a real fundamentalist religion.
Yes.
Showing, extraordinary self-deceit.
Yeah.
And then you end up with the Cheneys and the Rumsfelds.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I've been appalled when I pass a newsstand and there's some article there, News and World Report, China, the next threat. Like now we got to mobilize all our energy against China, and they're talking military.
And that's interesting because the threat of China is not military.
Exactly.
The threat of China is they can't be intimidated. It's very similar to what you're describing. Europe you can intimidate. So for example, when the U.S. tries to get people to stop investing in Iran,
Yes.
European companies pull out. China disregards it.
Right.
I mean, and you look at the history, you understand why. They've been around for 4,000 years. They have contempt for the barbarians. They just don't give a damn.
Right.
Okay, you scream, we'll go ahead and
Right.
take over a big piece of Saudi oil, or
Right.
Iranian oil, or
Right.
develop it. And that's the threat. You can't intimidate them.